Well, first of all, this is an amazing grouping to have. I just wanted to alert people. We have a number of doctors on here who were actually unable to communicate on this platform until very recently. And I think, and Dr. Finn, you were just brought back,
Okay, can you hear me
just
now?
days ago. Is that right? Oh,
Can you hear me now? Hello.
yes, absolutely. We hear you.
Hey,
It
David.
works.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm on, Cat. Okay, good. Okay, all right. Okay, you can hear me now, right?
We got you.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right. Okay.
Absolutely. So there's a mute button. So when you're not talking, you can just use that. And then when you
Okay.
are, the rest of us will mute.
All right. Okay, we managed to make this work. Okay. All right.
Hi, Dr. Wiseman.
Hey, David, you need to follow us.
Who said hi, Dr. Wiseman?
Oh, the girl that you came up to in Washington, D.C. and said, well, who are you and why are you here? This is Texas Lindsay.
Okay.
It's good to hear your voice again. I was at the hearing sitting
Right.
behind you.
Okay. Right. I remember that, and I saw that you'd sent me a message. I have no idea how to reply to it. So.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm glad you're here.
So, shall we sort of just? I'm not actually going to say very much.
You a story. You just said, "Hi, I'm the girl that you came up to." Like, I'm thinking, wait a minute. I got to think about that for a minute. I think there might have been a few of those. But I tell you another story. There was one lady at that hearing. I walked in and she said, "Hi, I met you this time at the earlier meeting right over there." And she pointed to the spot where I was sitting 9 months ago. So I thought, oh boy, a woman is coming up to me in a meeting and said, "I met you at this exact spot 9 months ago." And it was fortunate because Werner Mendelhall was just walking in as an attorney. I said, "I got to have my lawyer present. If a woman's going to say that to me, I met you at this spot 9 months ago, I better have a lawyer present." So anyway, that's my little story.
Come on, Jan. Kick in.
It hasn't been 9 months yet. Well, we do have a full house already. We have almost 1,000 people listening to us right now. So I'm excited that y'all are all here. I brought Dr. Brian Tyson up and Dr. Sabine as well, who's been frequenting the spaces a lot lately and speaking out. So I'm glad we could all be here. And Jan, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't feel like I need to actually talk very much. That's it's not my thing to do a lot of talking on these things, but it's remarkable to have, basically the founders of the Global COVID Summit here in the room. And the Global COVID Summit was one of the earliest groups to be, basically talking with a voice at an organizational level. Basically, of course, it was not the only one, but it played, I think, a very significant role in helping shift the narrative. So I'm very excited to host, Dr. Urso, Dr. Cole, Dr. Tyson, Dr. Lindley, Dr. Finn, and Dr. Wiseman in the room. This is remarkable, and so I'm not gonna talk very much. I want to kind of get into very quickly reactions with respect to what you saw in these Twitter files. I think this is the starting point for us, and I think maybe I'm looking at the order that I see here. Maybe we can go kind of in reverse order. Maybe starting with Dr. Wiseman, since you were the last to speak here. What is your reaction to the Twitter files?
I haven't had a moment to look at them. You're talking about the revelations of the government interference. I haven't. I've been working on other stuff in COVID. I have no reaction. I just don't have time. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's no problem. Well, let's we do want to go back to you and talk to you, but let's get some other reaction. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Finn, because Dr. Finn just recently got reinstated onto Twitter after quite a significant sojourn.
Yeah, I had 8 accounts, and after my 8th ban, I just gave up. I was like, I'm done. But as far as the Twitter files go, not a single thing has surprised me yet. It seemed to be that way from the beginning. I did get the knock, if you know what that is. And they did proceed to read me tweets from my banned account, which I got reinstated yesterday. But this was from 2020, 2021, that he was reading my tweets. Now, this is a federal agency reading my banned, suspended tweets. And I said, I knew they were involved. I mean, how else would he get word for word? I mean, there was no.
Dr. Finn, can I just jump in? What is the knock? Can you explain that?
Sure. When a federal agency knocks at your door and scares your kids. That's what the knock is.
And so these agents came into your home and were reading you these messages.
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, that's pretty astounding in itself, don't you think?
Very much so. It was evident they were trying to intimidate me, which is hard to do, to be honest. So I turned it back on them, and I haven't heard from them since.
So none of this surprised you?
No, none of it.
Lynn, you were really outspoken, as Richard. And most of the time you basically spoke science. In fact, almost always you're speaking science unless somebody started really coming after you. When you were thrown off of Twitter 7 or 8 times, several times, of course, using someone you know's phone numbers, what were the reasons why you were thrown off? Because you said bad things, or because you spoke truth in science?
I was never disrespectful to anyone. I never said bad things. My first Twitmo experience was a week's ban for basically saying that the spike protein itself is pathogenic. It doesn't need the RNA or the rest of the virus for it to cause disease. And that was a big no-no, because no one in 2020 was declaring the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 as being the cause of destruction in the body. They were just saying, oh, no, it's just a means for attachment. And once, I had a war room at my house and broke down the entire genome and looked for every binding site that could possibly occur and every mechanism that could occur and what that would entail. And that's when I realized this cannot happen in nature. Impossible for this spike protein to be derived in nature to attack this many systems in the human body. Impossible. So
let me ask you a question, Lynn, because I've been following you for so long. So you started letting people know, like Peter Daszak. Who's Peter Daszak, and why did he block you so early in this fight?
Oh, well, he was the firewall between the Wuhan Institute of Virology and our own NIH. So he was the firewall, and he would funnel grant money to Wuhan and Eco Health Alliance, which is you always need to watch what they're doing. And I've always watched what they were doing, where they were in the world, what viruses they were looking at, what Ebola, Marburg, Nipah. Always keep an eye on what they're doing and follow the money, because it's going through them. And when I basically proposed to Peter Daszak that this virus, number one, was synthesized in a laboratory, and number two, was already here by Thanksgiving of 2019, he immediately blocked me.
So Lynn, let me ask you a question. What credentials do you have to be able to do all that stuff? I mean, do you actually know about viruses?
Well, I don't know anything about viruses. I studied viruses. No, I studied microbiology in undergrad. I went to medical school, and I did virological research as well. And I developed therapeutics for such things presently. Some of the simple questions I asked, both the Barrick lab, I asked simple questions. I was blocked immediately. I asked Trevor Bedford some simple questions, blocked Christian Anderson. And when it later came up that all of their emails popped up in Fauci's discourse on how to shut Martin Kulldorff and Jay Bhattacharya up, it became evident that I was in a hotbed of people that are not very friendly to me.
So what about, one of the things I remember you talking about early on was the RATG 13. They threw that out there into the PubMed circulation and said that this is the virus discovered by Sheng Li in China. So you went right after that and said it was impossible, and that's one of the reasons you got banned.
Yeah, it was not only impossible, but they made some mistakes in creating RATG 13, and those mistakes made it obvious they were covering their tracks. RATG 13 cannot live in a bat's body temperature. Cannot live in a bat's body temperature. They did not get it from a bat. So that right there told me something funny was up. And as a group of friends of mine, a molecular biologist and a few others that later became Drastic, as we went through all of the genomic potentials and how it possibly could happen, it became evident that the way it was constructed was almost as a decoy.
So basically, you were one of the few people that could actually peel through that data. You got too close to the hornet's nest, and then basically that's when you started getting banned. Is that a fair statement?
That's very fair. And I never would imagine that could happen. I mean, in America, especially science. I mean, scientific discourse is how we solve problems. They've decided to push this narrative of consensus, but that's not scientific. Consensus is not scientific. I don't know where that came from. But even my colleagues will say, well, what's the consensus? What are we? We can't think for ourselves?
So so basically what you're saying is the middle ground is not relevant when it comes to science. The Earth's either round or it's flat. I mean, it's not a consensus. It's not something up for the analysis is in the data itself, and that's how you determine what is the consensus. Is the data tells you what it is.
It tells you what it is, and when people throw in their personal beliefs and opinions, then it doesn't become consensus anymore. It just becomes an opinion. And if you can't question something and get an answer, and you just get blocked, then you start saying, wait, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, when you're spending 7 days in Twitmo because you mentioned something about a cycle threshold of 45 not being, the way you would use PCR to determine a case, as they like to say, then you start saying, wait, I can't go on this platform because I questioned a cycle threshold of 45 for RT-PCR. That makes no sense.
Did you go after Drosten's work on the PCR test also?
I did. I most certainly did. Not only his work, the sequence he used, the fact that he didn't use it from an isolate, it's in his paper. It's in the supplementary information that he did not use it from an isolate. So he was basically given a genome to make a primer, and it's like given to you. Where is science now?
So I'm going to ask you a question.
Ryan, hey, Richard, sorry, Ryan here. I mean, Lynn's bringing up such a great point, is where is science now? Because, and you've heard me quote on stage, look, the difference between communism and freedom is the ability to censor so many brilliant people is just, I mean, it's antithetical to science. I mean, consensus never happens until all the questions have been asked, until people have had arguments, until people have had discussions, until all the data is, brought forward. And that's what, Lynn was asking basic questions. And that's what we all should have been able to do all the way along, instead of having a government coerce, private agencies or private social media companies in order to push, their other narratives and agendas and injections. And that's what's really crazy about this, is you have amazingly experienced physicians here, amazingly experienced colleagues. And look, we spend Tuesday nights on the phone in our planning meetings and group meetings. We're up till midnight, 1 a.m. And we always have different points of view on certain things, but that's how we learn from each other. So to silence people, that's what's really been shocking about this whole experience.
And Ryan, to your point, this wasn't the first time that something like this has happened where consensus was predetermined. I mean, if people think about the 80s, when the HHS secretary during the Reagan administration announced to the world at a press conference that HIV was the probable cause of AIDS, every scientist went, wait, what? Where's the paper? Where's the data? Where's the experimentation? Where is it? There was none. It was not allowed to be debated among scientists at that time. It was literally announced at a press conference by Fauci and Gallo. So it's not the first time where they took the narrative, they controlled the narrative, and they determined it consensus. And anyone who had a question of that consensus were banned or barred or their grants pulled. And this isn't the first time.
Well, and that's why
Dr. Finn,
this
so
sad little man needs to go away. The sad little man that's been in charge of basically dictatorially silencing science, pretending like he is the science for so many decades. I mean, this is really what it's revealed. And, you know, from the 80s until now, to have science, not only in America, but in so much of the world, controlled by the dictatorial funding dictates and mandates of this individual's mind. Hopefully we're going to enter a newer era of science as he retires, hopefully, because, what happened in the 80s recapitulated itself here. And hopefully enough people are now awake that we can at least try to stop this from ever happening again. Over.
Yeah, I'd say that, and I'd agree, but I know Fauci is helping train his predecessor, and I know that he's going to make sure that all the bones that are buried will be revealed to whomever takes his place. And who knows, they may act on the same behalf, if not worse. Look at Cuomo. He was out. What did we get? Worse. And this isn't the first time where we're like, thank God he's finally out the door. What did he create while he was there? A whole culture of corruption in science, a whole culture of partnership with pharma that is an unholy coupling, in my opinion. And every single agency and every single medical board and association is now trained for decades, 40 years, to think that this is normal, and it is not.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lynn. I also think that, early on in this pandemic, it was easy for us to feel that collaborative, coordinated attack on us pretty early on. Twitter became the only platform where we actually had, some leeway. And when we went to Washington, D.C., we did the, so for Jan, most of us we formed the America's Frontline Doctors, Joe Latipo, myself, and some of the others here on this call. Back in June 2020, and basically went viral, and then basically right after that, immediately websites were taken down, and pretty much everything that we put out was taken down, and that's when the real censorship really, really, really came down hard on people speaking out, and that was back in the early part of 2020, mid 2020. We still had some leeway to be able to speak, but it sort of escalated from there. And that's why you see the Twitter files where they then went after the Great Barrington people, and et cetera, et cetera. Anybody who had any kind of a platform was taken down. Forget the guys in California. They came with us. He put out their 2 ER guys. They put out a nice video. They got taken down. Ioannidis, somebody must have spoke to him behind the scenes. Ioannidis, one of the top 10 most cited scientists in the world. He pretty much has gone silent since getting some word out on the actual infection fatality rates early on. So people were silenced in multiple ways, including what you see in the Twitter files, but also behind the scenes, where people are basically warned: if you speak out, you're not going to be funded. You're not going to be your stuff's not going to be accepted in the journals. When we went to Washington, D.C., we talked about hydroxychloroquine and other early treatment things, and the administration, Pence, Fleming and the White House said, hey, we don't want to go there. It's too hot a topic. We don't want to go there. So they refused, in a sense, to discuss anything to talk about early treatment. And that became their MO. Like, all we can talk about is vaccines. So, of course, we ended up talking out against vaccines. And then Pierre Corey, of course, who's one of the founders of Global COVID Summit, also got viral with the ivermectin. And at that point, they'd start to do with the ivermectin what had happened with hydroxychloroquine. But I think in general, the entire experience has been very, very coordinated, and the Twitter files show all that. I want to kind of just flip gears real quick. If we've got Ryan Cole on here, Lynn, and many others. Got Brian Tyson, Kat, David Weissman. One of the things that's happened, I don't know if people have seen this. I'll just flip gears because this is our strength is in our science. So there's been an interesting thing we've been looking for, where Ryan's talked about it, where he said, hey, I think these vaccines are eventually going to create the same thing that you might see if you get bee venom. You get little amounts of bee venom, and eventually you're going to develop some tolerance. And what we've seen lately is that there's been some good science coming out on IgG4 and how that's another impactor on why these vaccines are such a failure, despite the fact that they have significant limitations because they distribute to brain, bone marrow, adrenals, ovaries. They go everywhere. They don't stay in the arm. 80% leaves, despite the fact that the massive production, because the RNases can't break down the pseudouridine component. Despite all that, we're seeing, of course, all the components they put in, CD147, TMPRSS2, all the different ACE2 receptor, the NRP1, all the things that they basically turn this Volkswagen into a Sherman tank. One of the things we're starting to see is some immune compromise. Ryan, I know you and I were talking about this. You want to kind of talk about what does this mean, this immune compromise that's occurring because of the IgG4 levels, and you want to take that?
Yeah, real quick. So, yeah, it was in the journal Science Immunology by Pascal Ergang with the primary author. And this, I mean, this is why the silencing
Dr. Cole, if you could just explain in sort of layman's terms what exactly is happening.
Oh, I plan on that. Yeah, you bet, Jan. That's a great point. So basically, I'm not going to geek out too scientifically here. The important thing is I'm going to tie it into the broader theme. When you silence doctors, people get hurt, and having immunologists, virologists, treating clinicians silenced when we know what is and what isn't good for the body. We have no agenda in any of this. Those of us who are here, part of the Global COVID Summit, our end goal is truth. Well, those of us who study immunology, virology, pathology, et cetera, when we see things that are being pushed forward that we know had potential harms, in retrospect, I'm not here to judge anyone. If you got one shot, don't get two. If you got two, don't get three. If you got three, don't get four. Just stop. But what Richard's bringing up is the fact that I've been talking about this for over a year. When you continuously expose the body to something like Richard said, a little bit of bee venom, and I'm a beekeeper on my organic farm. I get stung a couple times a year, and eventually you just build up a tolerance to where the body doesn't hyperreact. The same thing, if you have a kiddo and he or she has, chronic allergies, and you go get allergy shots, be it for, cat dander or dog dander or peanuts or whatever, a little bit of exposure to the protein, a little bit of exposure to the protein, a little bit of exposure, eventually your body says, you know what, I'm just going to calmly not react to that anymore. So, we've heard all this antibodies, IgG, oh, look, you're getting an immune response. And I've been saying all along, antibodies, schmantibodies, having the wrong kind of antibodies becomes your enemy. And so, when we make an immune response, sure, you want to form some antibodies. It tells you have immune memory. More important for immunity, always has been, always will be, is your T cell response. But again, I'm getting a little nerdy. What Richard's bringing up is articles are finally coming out confirming what we knew immunologically all along, is now the immune system is being blinded in a lot of people that have gotten too many shots. And you're switching to a type of antibody that is, it's in the category of immune tolerance. It helps you tolerate things instead of react to things. this is okay if you're trying to fight off an allergy. This is really bad news if you're exposed to a virus in the future that's similar to this virus or in this family of viruses, and you want your body to mount a response. Your body's going to say, I've seen that too many times. I'm just going to stay calm and not react. Now you're literally, a boat without a keel stuck in the water because you're a sitting duck for, that virus in the future. We knew this all along. This was why, being silenced on social media, being attacked and demeaned and defamed by the media literally has hurt people's lives. And immunologically, we're all very concerned. We're all creative doctors trying to figure out mechanisms and things for the future to help people. But at the same time, this is why you don't silence intelligent people that are creative thinkers. Over.
Yeah, can I?
Let's just jump in. We're going to intersperse this with some audience questions. There's been some fantastic audience questions added to the thread, and maybe we can field this with one of the doctors that hasn't spoken quite yet. So I will jump in, and also at the same moment, if when you jump in, if you want to talk about your reaction to the censorship files, that would be great. So here's the question: are there any stats on adverse reactions versus blood type? I heard that the formation of blood clots is less likely for O neg or O pos due to smoother surface of red blood cells. Anyone want to field that?
Ryan.
Yeah, it's true to a degree because your blood types on the surface of your red blood cells, whether you're A, whether you're B, whether you're O, it's a glycoprotein. It's a sugar protein. And sugars and proteins interact in the blood. And, part of the bad outcomes in COVID itself was, how high is your blood sugar? Are you type 2 diabetic, type 1 diabetic? That was the one factor that played, right up there with obesity, a critical factor. So, it was interesting. Early on, there were some studies that suggested that those with O blood type actually did better when they got COVID. And, some other data seem to negate or neutralize that. So it depends on the study you look at. But there is some veracity to the fact that each blood type does have different propensity to clotting and different propensity to be a little more hypercoagulable. There's a lot of other factors that go into play, but that's a valid scientific point. Absolutely. Over.
Yeah, but it's not a clear cut thing that someone who's got this is David Wiseman. O blood type is twice as likely to get a certain type of adverse events. I mean, the papers that I've seen haven't been super convincing, although they've been usually small, 200, 300 series. I think there was one from Saudi Arabia very recently. So I'm not so excited about that. I mean, I remain open to the possibility, but I think there's other factors. I saw a paper today of a variant of a gene that's involved in the handling of iron. That's involved with a disease called hemochromatosis, something I've been interested in for actually quite a long time. And so I think there's going to be some, if they do this properly, of course, which they won't. There's no reason why we can't do massive, genome-wide, sort of screening and see who is coming up for different patterns of adverse events. This is the sort of stuff that NIH should be doing. They've studied. A lot of the vaccine injured people, in the React-19 group, they've put out only a very limited amount of information, and there's a hell of a lot more they could and should have been doing a long, long time ago. So I think whether it's blood groups or any other genetic factors, they should be on top of this, and either they're not doing it at all, or they're doing it but they're not telling anyone about it. And I think that's really a critical problem.
Can I just jump in? It's Lynn. There was a paper early on by Ali et al. On ACE2 coding variants in different populations and potential impact on the binding affinity of the virus to your cells. There is some clear-cut patterns, and I'd suggest maybe reading that. That was from 2020, around August of 2020.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think any of the obvious receptor binding things that we know about ACE2, there's going to be polymorphisms And it would not surprise me at all. There's going to be different propensities to adverse events and things that go, and long COVID for that matter as well.
Well, and I like the fact that you guys bring up that it's multifactorial, and it really is. There's a doc in the audience here, Irene I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name here, Mavrakakis. Anyway, she brings up a great point. Another adverse reaction that happened in all of this is there's a cross-reactive epitope on the influenza vaccines, especially the quadrivalents that came out in Italy in fall of 2019. And you look at the really adverse death rates in northern Italy, and they were much higher because there's a protein that cross-reacts to the spike protein on one of the quadrivalent variants of influenza. And so, be it blood group type, be it hemochromatosis genes, be it, did you recently get another type of vaccine? There's so many factors, and David's 1,000% correct. We have the ability to look into gene databases, look at outcomes of all these different groups. That is where the funding should be right now. And we'd have so many answers. And we have these medical technocrats that are hiding the truth and doing improper or science by omission. They won't do the science and they won't fund the science. And people will continue to get hurt and people will continue to be lied to until the funding for real science happens. Over.
Yeah, Ryan, you bring up a good point about them not even wanting to look at the data. Part of my experience with this whole, censorship, I had the state of California in my urgent care for 2 years while we were collecting data. They were only interested in the comorbidities and the age groups of who was infected, and basically disregarded the entire treatment data that we had also listed on our spreadsheet. We turn the spreadsheet in every Friday, and our database is now over 20,000 positive COVID patients treated. But yet, they don't want the information. They don't want the treatment data. They don't want the reinfection rate data. They don't want to see what other co-infections were going on. We were the first to report the RSV outbreak in summer, which was really, really abnormal, showing that immunosuppression that was going on. The number of shingle cases that were being presented in our clinics as well, showing again immunosuppression. Nobody wanted the data. And it was interesting is in December of 2021, after basically I got One American News deplatformed off of YouTube, I got suspended from Twitter. The state of California pulled out of my clinic and basically shut me down and censored me for the rest of this time.
Well, and that's because you were trying to save lives, Brian, and that went against the narrative. I mean, there was only one answer that they wanted people to have, and that's why people got continuously censored on this platform and others, is because you were actually doing something that beat them at their own game. And, God bless you for being a hero. And Dr. Fareed, you guys were just pioneers early on. And the amount of lives you saved, not just the 20,000, but hundreds of thousands around the world, because you guys set the example. God bless you, my brother, for doing that. Over.
Yeah, Brian. I'll tap in on that. One of the things that you did was that study, which showed basically you were doing 98% better than the surrounding county that was all around you. In a sense, you were the one. Your patients were actually doing extremely well. I think 98% better than I think in the same county, if that's what I remember from the paper. So, what do you attribute some of that success to? The fact that you have magic in your hands, or the fact that you just practice good medicine? I mean, explain what happened there. Why were you successful? Why was the surrounding county and the surrounding areas not so successful?
Well, I mean, it goes back to basic, practice of medicine. Number one is we treated early. We treated the symptoms. We did chest x-rays. We saw inflammation. We treated inflammation. We saw pneumonia. We treated pneumonia. We saw blood clots. So we prevented blood clotting for future patients. We saw oxygen levels going down. So we gave supplemental oxygen and had people take home oxygen tanks. We didn't sit around and say, there's no outpatient treatment. You have to wait and go home for 7 to 10 days. And if you're not feeling any better at that point, go to the ER, get intubated, get put on morphine and Ativan and basically expire. We didn't take that as acceptable practice in our clinic, and because we did not accept that, we had the high success rate that we did.
And Dr. Tyson, it's sort of astounding to hear that someone basically doing something, essentially following the procedure, upholding the Hippocratic Oath, would be, basically attacked for doing so. And there are these other preposterous protocols in place. What do you account? How do you account for this actually happening? And this speaks to another question that was actually asked by one of the viewers.
Well, I think it goes back to what's really driving this whole pandemic. And it was the vaccine. When you look at it, to get an emergency use authorization, you have to have no other alternative treatment available. And I was the one who broke that story in the news, because we were looking at all of the different emergency use authorization tests. We were looking at who can get qualified for tests. We were working with the lab who was trying to get a test to market. And so we were looking at all of these different avenues under the emergency use authorization. And we found that it's stated very clearly, in order to get emergency use authorization, there could be no other alternative. Well, the alternative to the vaccine would then be early outpatient treatment with repurposed drugs. We knew hydroxychloroquine worked. We knew that dexamethasone would work with inflammation. We were seeing inflammation on chest x-rays, just like we were seeing with H1N1 back in the early 2000s. We knew how to treat it, and we knew that we could prevent a lot of these problems by using early repurposed drugs and treating patients, before they develop that cytokine storm.
Brian, just a question, because I think I want to kind of, in a sense, put this in the right context. So drugs for prevention of clotting are not repurposed, right? They're just drugs we use for prevention of clotting. So that's on label, right?
That's correct.
And then drugs we use for inflammation, pretty much we use for inflammation and other diseases on label.
That's correct.
So the only time, in a sense, and then respiratory drugs that we use for respiratory compromise, again, on label.
That's correct.
So the only part of the equation where we were off label was attacking the virus. So did you go willy-nilly and just pick things out of a cart, or did you actually look in the literature and find things that looked like they worked in tissue culture and related diseases? And is that what you chose to do, or did you just go willy-nilly out of the cart?
No, we
obvious,
we did what good doctors do, which is you start doing a database research. What other times have we seen coronavirus? When did we see, the first SARS outbreak? When did we see MERS come out? What were some of the drugs that they were looking at? And hydroxychloroquine was at the top of that list. That article came out in 2005. That showed chloroquine is a potent inhibitor of the SARS coronavirus and its spread. That's how we found that out, and we know that zinc inhibits RNA polymerase. So we knew that we needed to use zinc. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin later was found to be a zinc ionophore. So that combination worked real well. We also know that Zithromax has potent antiviral and antibacterial properties for atypical pneumonia. So when you look at a chest x-ray and you see atypical pneumonia, Zithromax was one of those drugs that we would go to. And so we started using it. And next thing you know, patients started getting better. One of the asthma medications that we see a lot and we use a lot is budesonide, right? And Solumedrol, dexamethasone. So when patients were acting like asthma, I can't breathe, I'm having a hard time, I'm getting chest pressure, chest tightness, and patients were acting like asthma, oxygen saturations were going down. We started using asthma medications to help them get better. And guess what? They got better. So when I went on KUSI News in San Diego and I broke that and said, "Hey, this is what's going on, guys. We have treatment. We can beat this." I was shut down like I was some quack doctor out of Dr. Seuss book, and people basically tried to discredit everything that we were doing. It was insanity to me.
Who was coordinating these attacks upon you?
It was weird. It was, the social media companies. They were putting labels. Facebook shut me down. YouTube shut anything down that I did interview wise. And I tried posting on Twitter. I tried posting, asking questions. I'd get banned. I'd get shut down. I'd be told to delete my tweet or delete my Facebook post. And it was these so-called quote fact checkers. But nobody knew who these fact checkers were.
Yeah, I kind of think about it. Remember how Breitbart supported us early on when you and I were in Washington, D.C. And now basically it's come down to almost no support except for Epoch Times. I mean, we basically have, one source of true news. And of course, we've had some One American News. We've had some others. You've done pretty well out there with Dan Ball. But overall, it's been 20,000 patients treated. And just for the audiences, how many have died that you treated before that you were able to get before 7 days?
Nobody died before 7 days. We had 4 deaths who came to us after 7 days, 2 died on the same day that they saw us, didn't get treated. Those, and we had 6 hospitalizations.
Hey, let's bring it up to date because you have so much info. What are we seeing right now? The RSV, the rhinovirus. What are we seeing? Because you're basically gathering data every day.
Yeah. So right now, the biggest one is influenza A. We actually had our first case of influenza B today. RSV in kids seems to be running pretty rampant still. Human metapneumovirus, we're seeing some scattered cases on, and rhinovirus seems to be coming down. And we saw a lot of that about 2 months ago into last month. So right now it seems to be influenza seems to be the main culprit. And then the new variants are coming out from coronavirus, which we're seeing an uptick in those cases as well.
So this is an important question. Why are these other viruses popping up? I'd love to get either David or Lynn or Ryan talk about why are we seeing these other viruses come back? What happened with flu last year? Why was it not in big numbers? Is this just poor reporting, or was there some other secret thing happening?
I like to call it the secret social lives of viruses. Viruses compete, just like in evolutionary all of nature. There's always competition. So if you look historically at the data from Europe and the Western world over the last 50 years, you'll see a strong cold season, maybe a strong flu season or two, then a strong 2 cold seasons, and back and forth and back and forth. So viruses will actually produce a little language of peptides, and they'll send a little message and they'll stick it to the off gene and backbench other viruses. So when people say, "Oh gosh, they're covering it up. It was influenza being hidden as COVID." No, actually, influenza was quietly there all along, but at a lower rate. And this is just how evolution works. There's always competition and survival of the fittest. And so why are we seeing less COVID now for the most part? And like Dr. Tyson said, we're seeing more influenza, more RSV, other viruses. It's because COVID is weaker now, and now the off genes from those other viruses are able to outcompete COVID in many settings. Why are we seeing those other viruses wake up? Well, a lot of people got the shots and are immune suppressed, and we're seeing, like we mentioned earlier with some of the tolerance, chronic immune suppression, not just in antibodies, but also T cell lines. So it's allowed a lot of viruses to wake up. What I'm kind of afraid of right now is we kind of have a population that's a walking petri dish of so many viruses that we normally don't see that are reactivated because of chronic immune suppression population-wise. Over.
Yeah. So is it true that the flu arrived about a month or two earlier this season? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, in some of the data sets, it looks that way, absolutely. And this off-season brewing of multiple different viruses, again, especially mRNA injections, the breadth of immune suppression that they cause, your broad natural immune response, not your specific to one virus or another, or one infection or another, but your broad array of immunity. And Dr. Vanden Bosch is brilliant on this topic. And I know he's sometimes a little more complex to read and understand, but he's been screaming from the rooftops for over a year. Folks, we're suppressing our broad natural immunity with a really poorly thought out vaccine program in the middle of a pandemic. So because of that suppression of your breadth and in favor of a narrowed immune response, now we've woken up a lot of sleeping dragons over.
So I'm
Let's
going to
talk
jump
about
in
that real
here.
quick. I want to just one thing, Jan, because Ryan mentioned something. Sorry to interrupt. Ryan, you just talked about vaccinating in the middle of a pandemic. We keep hearing HOTES calling madly for more vaccination. What are the chances of vaccinating our way out of this thing?
0. And maybe HOTES could get 2 or 3 more and have a stroke, and then he can't say anything. I don't know. But it drives me nuts that you have liars like this pretending to be scientists, pushing something that has 0 chance of benefit. We know this, it doesn't prevent acquisition, transmission, disease, or death. It's a leaky vaccine. It's causing autoimmune problems left and right. Why he would, other than financial interests or self-interest or grant interest, continue to push something that has more than obviously failed is really tragic and disgusting. But at the same time, it has no chance. Vaccinating in the middle of a widespreading illness has no chance of ever succeeding, especially against a coronavirus. And this is a disaster. This is an immunologic, this is an evolutionary, and a biologic disaster. The shots need to go away like a year and a half ago. They need to go away, period. So don't get another one, period. But to have medical bureaucrats continuing to force this mindset to cause harm to humanity is mind-boggling. I'll just leave it at that and try to keep my words not to be
for the
swear
quick
words.
science, David, maybe Lynn,
Over.
Ryan. So the neutralizing antibodies, are they improving as we go through this rapid vaccination? We're up to our 4th or 5th vaccine. Is that what are the major issues that make that
Go for
an
it, Lynn.
impossibility?
Go for it, Lynn.
There are several papers and many observations from all of us that with each and every booster, with each and every shot, the ability to produce antibodies declines. So those who say, well, it's okay in the elderly, they're wrong. It's okay in the children, they're wrong. I do not see a need in any demographic for this vaccine. It impairs your ability to produce this antibody. It impairs your ability for secretory immunity as well. It impairs your overall immune system as well as toll-like receptors activating latent viruses, the herpes, the shingles, the Epstein-Barr, all of these activating and spreading again. I don't see it appropriate in any case for this. Not a single one.
Yeah, they're all risk zero benefit, Lynn. They're all risk zero benefit, and it's actually technically criminal at this point because it's an agent, a bad therapy at best, that's causing more harm than good. So why can these? I don't know. To me, it's just criminal activity to continue this program.
So
Right,
I
when
just
you
wanted
look
to
at
jump
this-
in. We do have one doctor that's on that hasn't had a chance to speak yet. And it's actually very relevant to the discussion point right now, because I'm just going to read out the tweet that she was actually locked out of her account for. That's Dr. Kat Lindley. She wrote, listen to Paul Alexander, PhD. Smallpox vaccine to prevent monkeypox could cause global smallpox vaccinia epidemic. I warn, do not be that stupid to understand you have damaged the immune systems of billions with COVID vaccines, potentially. Dr. Lindley, if you could jump in.
Yes, I was actually just going to bring up a point. What they're all trying to say from the clinical standpoint, the reasons these vaccines, we are definitely encouraging people not to continue getting boosters and things like that is stuff that even Brian mentioned. We are seeing fulminant cases of flu. Strep is very virulent this year. RSV in older adults. And these type of things should not be happening. The reason they're happening is because the immune systems are down. And it's very important for people who have taken the vaccines to now do things to try to actually improve their immune system. And, we all talk about vitamin supplements. Vitamin D is extremely important, the stress reduction and things like that. It just never makes sense. One of the things I remember from early on that Peter McCullough said, he said in one of our early talks, he said, if you have to get more than one booster in the same year, the vaccine is failing. And now we are up to 5, 6, 7 boosters, depends which country you look at. And it's time for people to really go and remember that our immune system, our bodies knows exactly what to do. And that's why we all talked about early on about natural immunity. And Paul Alexander has published all sorts of studies on brownstone explaining why natural immunity is important. And it's kind of ironic that his Substack deplatformed me from Twitter 6-7 months ago.
While we're here, I'm just going to throw in another audience question because there's a ton of people that really want to get something in. This one's actually quite interesting, and this is kind of a contentious issue. I'm very curious of your opinions on it. So the question is, what is the current information we have regarding mRNA transfer from vaxxed individuals to unvaxxed?
Well, I'll start off by saying shedding is real. What happens when you produce a messenger RNA inside of a cell is some of the messenger RNA ends up on the outside of the cell wall. But because this thing is producing spike protein for 2 months or more in many individuals, it's the outside wall fills up with spike, and after that, these packages of what's called exosomes, spike protein with a lipophilic cover, end up getting spit out of the cell into the extracellular space, and they go to many places. They're able to travel into every secretion, across the placenta, into breast milk. They can get into the lungs. They can pretty much travel anywhere because they have a lipophilic component to them, and so that's called shedding. This is well known in this type of platform. A messenger RNA lipid nanoparticle producing that much protein over a long period of time is going to do that. So, Journal of Immunology, they found this up to 4 months later. I forget the name of the study. Ryan probably remembers the name.
Dr. Bonsall was the author on that one. Yeah.
So it's not a question of. It's just a question of how much is happening. It's not a question of if it's happening. It's just how much of this is happening. So that's the question that we don't have the answer to. That's the question that should be asked. That's part of what's called pharmacokinetics, where you define distribution. You define actually what is happening with something you're producing. This is not done on this whole platform, and now they're going to use this ubiquitous platform of the messenger RNA lipid nanoparticle. And as Kat just said, the lipid nanoparticle itself is actually decreasing the immune system function. It affects cellular immune response and probably overall depression of about 20%. So we're seeing that over and over in the studies. What else are we seeing? 40% more deaths in 2021. I wonder why that happened. So we're seeing, as people are looking at this, antibody-dependent cytotoxicity, which means after you get your second, third, fourth shot, you're basically activating and basically causing like an immune refocusing imprinting on not only your antibody responses, and the antibody responses become less efficient with time, as we were talking about earlier. They become non-neutralizing, but you also activate your cytotoxic T cells, your complement cascade, antigen-presenting cells, natural killer cells. The immune system, in a sense, ramps itself up to try to basically fight this one warrior that's got to fight the spike protein. And so, in a sense, then you become less efficient, not only at fighting the spike protein because it keeps mutating, but also at fighting cancer cells and other viruses. And then you have to add on the fact that the spike itself ends up going inside of nuclei and actually disturbs DNA damage repair, P53 and BRCA. So you have that happening. And then you also have difficulty with immune viral surveillance because the spike protein is also interfering with toll-like receptor 4, 7, and 8. So you have basically the ultimate biologic weapon, and the immune system now, as you see with the latest paper in the IgG4, which is basically not a response we have when we're trying to neutralize something. It's a basically IgG4 is basically a non-neutralizing antibody. And I usually tell people when you have that, what you have is like sticking a key inside of an ignition. Now you can't put the right key in. It's blocking, in a sense, the right thing from happening. So it's worse than it sounds. It's not just that you made a non-neutralizing antibody. You basically made a Trojan horse. So there's lots of reasons why this is all happening. As Ryan talked about, the secret social life of viruses, that's also probably made, in a sense, RSV and influenza have made, in a sense, upgrades to themselves to actually be able to use us as a host over and above what COVID was doing. And that's a really neat, it's called the viral arbitrium. It's a great thing that we can talk about at some point. But overall, we're seeing immune compromise in a big way. And you're going to see that's part of the reason why we're seeing all the problems we're seeing. And I forgot to mention one of the biggest things is that the spike produces the CD147, which binds up red blood cells and platelets, which is the reason why we're seeing all these vascular events. So at the end of the day, it's not only immune compromise, but it's also the fact that we have a massive amount of vascular issues on top of it. It's a horrible bioweapon.
Dr. Finn, you want to say something, but I remember you said something earlier, which I wanted to get you to clarify, which was just that the spike is kind of unusual or interesting in that it attacks every organ system. I believe that's what you said, but I guess you want to comment on what Dr. Urso was saying anyway.
I'll do both. I meant it's a multi-system pathogen. It can attack your endothelium, it can attack your organs, your spleen, your reproductive organs. It can pass the blood-brain barrier, and it could cause problems in your brain, in your neurological system. As Dr. Urso said, your bone marrow, your blood, your lymphatics. It turns off cancer surveillance, so you're free. That's where you're getting these turbo cancers, as they're coining the term. All of these things are accurate, and it's unusual to find something in nature that does that. Why? Because the virus only has one objective, and that is to replicate and make more viruses, period. That's its only goal. Its goal is not to go out and kill its host, because it'll kill itself. So when people realize that that is the goal of a natural virus, so it can persist, and this is attacking all of these different systems, something's not natural about it. Even just from a lay person's perspective, many lay people have come to me and said, you know what, something is wrong about all this. It doesn't make sense. And they needed to trust their gut, because they were right. And expanding on what the question from the audience was, in 2021, I wrote for America's Frontline Doctors a blog, and I was treating a young girl at West Point who was in full isolation with her 3 roommates because they weren't allowed out. And 3 of her roommates got vaccinated and she did not. And she refused. She didn't want to. She wanted to hold out as long as she could. And when they came back to her room, because they were only allowed to go get their shot and then come back because they were truly in isolation, she not only got a horrendous bout of COVID, but that was after she got the most painful shingles she'd ever had, and 2 other issues. Then one of the third girls got myocarditis. And for someone who was not sick, who was just rooming and isolated with 3 other vaccinated roommates, to get all of these things that we are seeing now from the vaccine, I wrote about who spiked the shot was my title, and it was about my hypothesis of vaccine shedding. That was my second ban.
Yeah, and so Lynn, it's not a hypothesis, right? I mean, it's a fact. I mean, the data's there.
Oh, the fact is, it is a fact, and the data is there, and we know it to be. At the time when I made it, it was at the end of 2020, and the article was written in January 2021, and I said it was anecdotal. However, this doesn't happen in a closed system, much like the cruise ships. We're a nice isolated system that we can study this on, right? And we're getting all of these vaccinated only cruises with massive COVID outbreaks. Well, what gives? And
Lynn, you brought something up to me about this early on when we were looking at the protocols. Like you said to me that they actually knew it in the protocols. Can you talk about that?
yeah, absolutely. They knew it because they made the endpoint symptom severity instead of transmission. And in the actual protocol, the handling directions were such that if you're going to be around a pregnant person, they had to be on two different types of
Contraceptives.
contraceptives. And if they were handling it, they had to wash or wear gloves. If they touched a vial, or if they were recently vaccinated, to sequester from other people, especially if there's going to be a pregnant person. And with all of these warnings in the protocol, the first thing I thought of is, how are they blindly recommending every pregnant woman to get this shot when even the handling directions say to avoid women of childbearing years or anyone pregnant? They had to have known that it would shed this way. They had to have known that there was transfer, that it could transfect in this way, because it's in black and white in the Pfizer protocol.
I guess the other question is, it might not be obvious to the listeners when it comes to the shedding question. I mean, is that just is it as simple as now there's virus out in the environment and that's going into the, your nasal passage, and that can accumulate and then cause the disease? It's just that simple.
No,
this is one of the
different.
proteins.
It's the fact that you're being programmed, your cells are being programmed to become spike factories. It's going to produce massive amounts of spike. That spike has the propensity and ability to bind to exosomes pulling waste out of your cells, out of your space. And those exosomes are exhaled. Those exosomes can come through, the messenger RNA itself can come through your pores, your sweat, and urine and feces of any close proximity or close domicile. So this can transfer to someone else, either through their respiratory system or their skin, close contact, etc.
To kind of go further on that, the spike is 95% of the disease. For the most part, the rest of the other 28 proteins don't really cause that much disease. The envelope causes some issues, but
yeah,
in general,
careful. I got banned for saying that the spike is the pathogen.
So that's basically that's where all the weaponry is. That's the CD147. That's the GP120. That's the NRP1. That's the ACE2, the TMPRSS2. All the direct effects on the nucleus, on the things we talked about, toll-like receptors 4, 7, and 8. Also the P53 and BRCA. All those things, weaponry is all on the spike. So in a sense, when you get a load of spike, you're getting spike protein syndrome, which is basically COVID-19, causes the inflammatory response. So yeah, the answer to your question is when you make more when you get the vaccine than you do when you get the virus, because the virus replication competency is only basically 5 to 7 days. The replication competency of this spike protein is 2 months or more.
So I see we have Justin Hart has joined the chat here, author of Gone Viral, talking a lot about different aspects of the COVID pandemic, the virus, and so forth. And I know, Dr. Urso, you had a question for him.
Good evening, all. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you, folks. I got to meet a lot of you recently in Miami at some of the conferences, and glad to just join for a brief conversation here.
Great to hear your voice, Justin. Yeah,